Hi everybody, Rob here from Prior Studios and welcome to this follow-up Fusion 8 tutorial where I'm going to look at just a few of the basic tools that you might use for motion graphics projects. So I've put together just a very simple little title sequence. If I just play this through, you can see there's a bit of an environment, a few lights, some focus effects, and more importantly, if we just get to this point, you can see there's a bit of film grain just to make it look a bit more natural. And 3D text, and this is full 3D text from within Fusion. This isn't an FBX animation imported from another piece of software. So let's just close that down and think about how we need to do this. So the first thing we're going to need is obviously the actual text itself. So let's go Add Tool, and if we go to 3D and we'll choose Text 3D. So there is a 2D text tool as well for Fusion. But seeing as we want to work completely within our 3D workspace, we'll use the Text 3D option. So first thing I'm going to do is just rename this, and we'll just say this is going to be called Fusion 8. The reason I'm doing that is because I'm probably going to have two separate text objects, one for the title and one for the little subtitle, or the strap, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so let's type in here, let's go Fusion 8, and let's just flick this up into a 3D view. So the first thing to talk about is probably navigation. So when you flick a tool up into a window, here we've got a 3D window, and we can use a combination of keystrokes and clicks to navigate around. So using the middle mouse button and just dragging, we can move our viewpoint around like so. If we middle and left mouse button click and drag, we can zoom in and out. So that's middle and left mouse button holding down and dragging, and then Alt and middle mouse button lets us orbit round. Okay, so that's the kind of the nuts and bolts of navigating our scene, and we'll be doing a little bit of that as we go, but it's worth remembering those three main shortcuts for when you're navigating the 3D space. Okay, so we have our Fusion 8 text here, but at the moment it has no depth. So let's come down here to Extrusion, and we can now choose an extrusion depth. So keeping an eye in the viewport, you can see this is extruding out. I'm going to go for, let's say, 0.2. Gives us a nice chunky look. I'm also going to choose a different font. So Arial's fine, but I'm going to just come down and I'm going to use my good old favorite Typograph Pro. And I'm just going to pop that in, and then I'm going to stick with extra bold, quite like extra bold, and just zoom out. And again, zoom out is left and middle mouse button clicking in and dragging. And if I want to orbit round, it's just Alt and middle mouse button, click and drag. And here you can see what's going on a little bit better. Now, I want to add a little bit of detail to this. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more. And what we can see is actually, we're not really getting anything reasonable for our kind of viewport feedback. So I'm just going to turn on shaded view, and that gives us a slightly better sense of what we're doing with our text objects. Now, this isn't a particularly pretty viewport look, but it's really good for getting us up and running, and we'll add in some of our own lights later on. Okay, so I'm going to add some bevel width and depth here, and you can see the two kind of working combinations. So you've got a good amount of control, and you can certainly define exactly what you need. The smoothing angle is more about the smooth. It's like a Phong angle in Cinema 4D, if that's where you're coming from, or maybe Maya. And you could probably see that on a rounded piece of geometry a little bit more easily. So if I just come over here and change that smoothing angle, you can just see that we're starting to break up a little bit more on the edge there. So I want to keep that smooth. So I'm just going to increase that until I get the look I want. Let's just zoom out. Okay, right, so we have some extruded text and we have some bevels on there. What can we actually do with this now though? Well, there's a few things we can do. We can do very simple right on, right off. which would allow us to animate that text coming on, so the most basic of transitions, which is pretty cool, but maybe we'll do something slightly different. What's worth bearing in mind is that most of the settings that you'll find over here in the details tab of Fusion are all animatable, and generally speaking, if we go to layout, we might want to choose a different center point or sizing, or we might want to do some transforming of character spacing, so on and so forth, which is what I did for my example. So you can right click it, click animate, and then that will add an animation track for that particular parameter. Now, I think before we do that, we'll come in here and we'll set up some of our other options first. And I think what would be nice is to have a background. So let's add a loader, which will then bring us something, just a file browser. So I'm going to go to my asset catalog, and I'm going to go to materials, and I'm going to choose an HDRI, and I'm going to use one of my skies, and I will use just this one here. So we'll see that we have a JPEG here. Now at the moment this doesn't do anything. I can flick this up and we can see, let's just fit that. That's the one I used. It's just a preview from an HDR that I use in some of my scenes. Let's just get our text over here and just fit that. Okay, so this is now our 3D view and this is now a 2D view. So the same controls work whether you're in a 2D or 3D view. Obviously you don't have the orbit controls, but it's still, you know, middle mouse and left mouse to zoom in and out, and middle and alt. In fact, you don't even need middle and alt, just middle mouse button and click to pan around. Okay, so we need to apply this image, because at the moment it is just a pure image. It doesn't do anything within our scene. So let's take an image plane to apply that to. So let's take add tool 3D, and we will choose image plane 3D. We'll connect that. We don't need to worry about what it's saying it's connected to, because that should do it automatically for us. And now we have our image plane within our scene. Now you can see the handle is here, but the image isn't, and that's because these two are at the moment completely separate entities. So we're going to need a merge 3D. So let's go 3D and choose merge 3D. Now, unlike the 2D merge in Fusion, you can actually connect many options to this. So we can add our text to this if we want, like so, and we could add our image plane like so. Let's drag that into a viewer, and now you can see we do actually have both. So I'm going to take my image plane and just go into my scale tool and just crank this right up. I'm also going to drop it right back away from my text. Maybe not quite that far. We'll see what happens as we get working. I might just bring that back a little bit. That was probably a little bit too far Z depth wise, but we'll worry about that later. Okay. Right, so what else do I want to do? Excuse me. I need to apply some kind of material to this Fusion. Now, if you were to add just a sphere 3D or a cube 3D or something, one of those normal geometry shapes, you can apply materials directly to it. Unfortunately, that doesn't quite work with text. So let's come in and just show you what I mean. So I'm going to go 3D material, and should we do a blin or a fong? I'm going to do a blin, I think. So if we try and connect that to our text, nothing's happening. It's just not letting us do it. And what we need to do is we need to tell Fusion the kind of UV coordinates. So we have our blin material, which is going to go up here. We're going to take our text. Let's just align these in a kind of a fairly logical manner. I'm going to add another loader because I want some bump. So I'm just going to add a loader, and this can go to, let's just choose any old, I'm going to go for a concrete, just concrete bump. We should see this loads in a second, and this is just a grayscale image of a concrete which should work quite nicely. For this to drive the actual bump, we need to add a bump node. So let's just go 3D texture bump map. Now that can go into that. This can go into the blin, and because this is a bump map, the blin node knows where to connect this in. So if we just highlight that, we should see that's already in the bump map material. So that's looking pretty good. Now what we need is a UV. So let's go add tool, 3D. Is this in the normal? Okay, so right at the bottom of the main 3D menu, we've got UV. So let's unplug the text from our merge, plug it into our UVs, and we need one more, which is a replace material. So we need to have the text driving a UV map, which is then going to drive a replace material, which is taking the information from this blin. So let's just go 3D and replace material 3D. We can plug that into there and the UVs into the replace materials. These two, let's just shuffle these across so they're nice and neat. These can go into the merge, and now our fusion material is taking this material to drive what it's looking like. So let's just zoom in, and we should find, hopefully, if I've done this right, we should find some nice bumpy material. Now of course we can go in and we can use the other channels to drive colour or reflection. I'm happy for this just to be a white material. That's kind of what I was going for. What I don't like, however, is the mapping. So let's take our UV map here, and I'm going to change this to cube map, which looks to be working as is. If there's any weird stretching or marks, you can just choose fit, and that should make this all fit across. I'm also going to change the depth of that bump. So at the moment the height scale is 1. I'm going to make this 0.5, maybe even less actually. Let's go for 0.2. Nice subtle bump, and you can just see that in there. Okay, so that's looking good. Now one more thing I'm going to need here is a camera, so let's just grab a camera from the top menu. Now I know in a previous video I did, some people weren't seeing this menu up here. If you don't see that, you can either click on the bin just to bring up all of the different options you have. All of the tools all live in here, or you can just right click, add tool, and let's just go for, well, we don't need to, we can just click up here because it's quickest for us. So I'm going to add this camera to the scene and just connect the nodes. I'm going to choose my camera, and a focal length, I'm going to increase this to, actually let's decrease it. I'm going to go for about 22 for a nice wide lens. Now if we click in this window here, in fact we don't even need to do that, we can go straight into our camera view, our merge view. We should be able to choose our camera, and if we go to 3D options, views, 3D viewer, view layout, where's my camera gone? Camera. Okay, so rather than perspective, we want camera 3D1. And if that throws you at all, just select the node, press F2 and give it a name. So I'm just going to call this render cam. And that way, when I go back into my camera list, I can see render cam is the one I want. Obviously you can name them whatever you need. Okay, so I'm going to put the merge into this viewer here, and I'm going to keep my camera view in this view here, and I'm just going to start adjusting some of these. So I'm going to bring that forward. Now what I need to do is just select my camera and make sure that it's kind of set how I want it to be. So I don't want it to be 4:3. I want this to be, I'm going to go for a 185 or 1.85, and I'm going to fit that in there. Okay, if I come back, bring my camera back until I can see my text. This is going to be kind of like my end point. So I can now grab my background again, which is my image plane, and just make sure this either lines up where I want it to, or whichever part of that image is showing where I want it to. So I'm going to go for about there. Now from this merge, I'm going to need a renderer because this on itself, it doesn't do anything. So I'm just going to choose a render, a 3D render, which is that one, which I can then throw into here, and I can look at my camera separately if I want to. So I'm just going to fit that to my scene, so make sure it's selected and go to image. And I'm going to choose 1920 by 814, which is pretty close to 1.85. Okay, so this is now my renderer. At some point I will need to add any color correction I want to do, and then I'll need a saver for this to actually save out. But we're getting there very quickly. What I do need to do is add some lighting to the scene. So let's add, let's just go to the bin and let's go to the 3D section and add some lights. So I'm going to add an ambient light, and I'm going to add 2 spotlights. I think will probably be enough for me, like so. I can close the bin down. Now the ambient light, I'm going to connect directly to my scene here, and I want high quality on for this preview here. And what we do need to do is I'm going to make sure that shadows are turned off for the ambient light. I'm also going to pick a colour, maybe just slightly warm, just a little bit yellowy peachy, and that should be for the ambient colour, sorry, not for anything else, like so. I'm going to decrease the intensity, like so, and you can see what's going on here. In my 3D viewport, you can see that the effects are taking place, but nothing is really changing in my renderer window. So let's just go to renderer, and there is a lighting. So where would you go? Controls, enable lighting, that's better, and enable shadows, and that means that any effects that we make in our 3D space will actually carry on through to our renderer. So now when we go to our ambient lighting, we can increase this intensity and choose an amount that we might like. I might even crank this up. No, that's too much. Okay, that'll do. So I've got lighting. I've got the shadows turned off on my lighting, my ambient light, because I want to use the spotlights to kind of create the drama in the scene. So I'm going to take this spotlight here, just bring it in front of the Fusion text, and hopefully you can see you have a few controls for a spotlight. Let's just plug it in, and now you can see we've got this spotlight and it's shining on the back there. I'm going to turn off the shadows for that. I don't want it kind of making this gobo effect on the sky, because it shouldn't really be lighting the sky. So what I'm going to do is, I've got the shadows turned off. We have cone angle, which is kind of what you'd expect it to be. Penumbra angle, which is the kind of the outer fall off of the light itself, and the drop off, which is not what you'd expect it to be. It's not the kind of intensity fall off. This is the drop off, the harshness between the cone angle and the penumbra angle. So let's go from no decay for decay type to linear, and this means we can much more clearly define what's going to be lit. So decay rate, we can bring that down, or we can increase it. I'm going to increase or decrease it down just until I start getting that bright point. And at this point I can choose where I want my lighting to sit. I'm going to bring it across to the side. I'm just going to rotate it around. I'm doing this in my merge 3D viewport, which is this one over here on the left. I'm going to take my second spotlight, and I'm going to make this one a slightly cooler, bluer colour. Let's just connect that up to our merge 3D. and I'm going to just move this one back over to the other side. I'm just going to spin it round like so, and I'm going to have a linear fall off for this one as well, not too bright. I'm going to increase the cone angle and the penumbra angle just to get that kind of smooth drop off. I might even bring this one pointing down slightly, just lift it up just for a little difference there. Might turn on shadows for this. No, I still don't think the shadows are necessary. Okay, so this is pretty much how I created the video you saw. All that's left to do is to animate. So as I mentioned before, and to just do any color correction. So should we start with the look or should we start with the animation? Let's start with the animation. That's how I would normally do it. Okay, so the animation really is done in two things. For me, I animated the camera. So if we go to the transform tab of the camera here and give ourselves a fewer frames, go for like 125 frames thereabouts. And I generally, with this kind of thing, I start with my end frame, which is going to be here. So my Z offset for my camera, at say frame 105, I want to be here. So I'm going to right click Z offset, hit animate. I'm going to move the scrubber back to, let's say about quite near the beginning, frame 9 or 10. And that has automatically set a key for me. So if I then move anything, this will change. This figure will automatically change for me. So I need to grab my camera and I'm going to push in and stop there just after the camera has passed beneath that text. Now if I press play, we should find that the camera pulls back and I get that reveal. Okay, so I'm also already thinking this text is way too bright. So I'm just going to come back into my ambient lighting, maybe just turn that off a second. Yeah, I'm going to just decrease the intensity of this until I get just a bit of that detail back. So I'm a bit happy with that. That was just that kind of burnt out white was just doing my head in a little bit. So I'm also going to just tweak the intensity of some of these lights just until some of that detail comes back about there. Let's just check the other one. Yeah, I like this because it's pulling on the 8 a little bit and just separating it very slightly, which I quite like. Okay, sorry, so getting ahead of myself. So the camera has now been animated, and you can see in both views this is updating pretty well. Now if you want to go in and adjust the animation, there's different ways you can do that. You can either click on the timeline and then you can choose your camera from the list. Render cam, we can see, has keyframes, and you can see already that there's a linear transition from keyframe to keyframe. Now you can move the keyframes around here, but if you go into spline and then choose the Z offset, you can choose points on this spline, and this is working like F-curves in other pieces of software. You can choose both, one or the other, and you can smooth out those transitions. So if you want to have kind of an easy in, easy out, or easy ease type of a transition for your camera move, you can do that very, very easily. If you want to have a shoulder on there, you can do that too. All very simple, one click and drag. If you want to move the keyframes, then you can actually just grab the knot itself, and that works perfectly well. Okay, so that's a little look at how you can adjust your animations. So let's go back to our flow, our node flow here. And I think really the only other thing I did animation-wise for that particular example was in the text. I took the character spacing and again, probably just before the camera came to a halt, I set a key. So just right click, animate, and then back earlier in the animation, I just spread that character spacing wide open. Let's go to something like 2.2. I'm just looking in my merge view here, just to see how it's looking. And that's already animated. Again, I could come into my spline and I could choose the character spacing, and if I wanted to just smooth that end out. Probably don't need to worry too much about the start point, because most of it's off screen at the time. But I think I will just smooth out that kind of final keyframe there. I might just smooth this out just a little bit. Okay, like so. So that's going to look pretty cool. And if we just make sure we're in there, if I then just hop back to the beginning of the scene, hit play, and this is reasonably fast. This is just going to whip through, and we'll get to see a preview. And you can see that the character spacing is pretty wide, and they're just jostling in for position as the camera starts to pull back. And that's looking good. Obviously, in my example, I had a strap line under here talking about what I was going to cover. That's looking pretty cool. I'm pretty happy with that. And we'll see it run smooth now. Now this is, yeah, that's really nice. Now, I would probably go on to add more layers of clouds so we get some parallax in there, which would look really cool. But other than this, all we need to do is, I'm going to add let's go for color, and I'm going to go for curves. I'm just going to connect that into here for me, and you can see I have my curves. I'm just using I'm going to use RGB, and I'm just going to add just a little contrast like so. I'm not going to animate it. You can choose which channels you're going to affect. So if I wanted to boost the reds, maybe I could just turn off the others and just play around with these. Okay, so one more thing I did do, and I'll just increase the size of that viewer just so you can see the effect it has. Is I added a film noise. So if we go to our bin and we go to film, I added some film grain. I also added a defocus. So let's just throw that excuse me, in there. And I'm going to do the defocus first. So connect up my curves, and then connect that to my film grain. And obviously you need to show which of these is going to be. So where we were changing, I was boosting the highs of the red, but I was only looking at the renderer. So make sure you're looking at the right nodes. Okay, so I've got the kind of glowy red highlights, which looks really good. I had the defocus effect, which we can put in here, and let's crank this size right up. And look at a slightly earlier frame. Just because it's got a really lovely kind of film-like response, this bloom level on the defocus. It's really quite lovely. And maybe increase that even more. So what I did is I basically just faked a rack focus effectively. So we want the focus to be on by, say, frame 94. We want this to be 0, and just remember that's going to be 7.9. So let's just go defocus size, animate, and then by here we can go, that's going to be, let's just round it up to 8. We could probably go higher if we wanted to, but that's fine. And then that focus is now going to happen for us, and we should see So we just pull back through our timeline, we're getting that really lovely effect. Okay, so the final stage is to go into film grain, and you can see that's horrible. So let's just select it. It'll bring the size right down to say 0.1, and the strength I'm going to reduce down to probably 0.02. We want it to be subtle, but I'm going to increase the roughness. Now if I crank this right up, you'll see it just becomes quite contrasty. 0.3 looks right. I'm going to increase the strength. Okay, so 0.03, that's looking good. And that doesn't need to be animated at all. We're more than happy with that as it is. So the last thing to do is to take a saver node, which automatically connected there. I'm just going to go to the desktop, call this title, and let's call it title 1 is fine. This is going to be we'll save this as, let's say, a QuickTime movie. Save, and in the saver, if we make sure this is all looking right, export, yeah, that's all fine. Format H.264 is fine. I'm going to go for 24 frames a second and keyframes there, that's fine. And then all we do is we hit render, and then we get this box where we can just check excuse me, our settings, press start, and you can see you get live feedback as you're rendering. It does tell you what's going on. You can see generally these nodes kind of thinking about things, and the defocus is the most intensive task in the process, which is why you can see it's taking about, I don't know, half a second or so to do each frame. So we've already rendered 14 frames. So in no time at all this is going to be done. I'll just pause and render complete. 1 minute 54, you can see there, and it's just over a second a frame, which is pretty good considering all the effects we've got going on. So if I just open up our rendered file, just navigating to the desktop, you can see timing sucks, but the look itself is particularly nice. That kind of combination of the grain and the defocus works really well, especially when you get these little catch lights. In my first example, I actually had a point light just kind of zipping across the face of this just to give a little sparkle, which I think worked quite nicely, but actually this works perfectly well as well. So hopefully that's been a decent introduction, and it's helped you not only kind of work in your 3D viewport, which I know some people find a little bit tricky in Fusion, but has also just given you a few little bits of understanding, not just for nodal workflow, but also getting a material onto a text object, because people really struggle with that. But also just a little look at some of the animation tools you have. So I've not even scratched the surface, but I would suggest looking at the splines. And again, these windows work the same, so left and middle mouse button, click and drag to zoom, and then middle mouse button to pan around, and then the timeline, which gives you all your keyframes, and you can just come in here very easily retiming things. So hopefully, maybe in the next example, we'll do something brought in from another 3D package. So I could do some text work in Cinema 4D, and we could bring that in, and I can show you how you can work with assets built somewhere else, not just built within Fusion. But thanks very much for watching, and if you've got any questions or there's something you would like me to cover, please do leave a comment below, and I'll do my very best to get that into the next video. Thanks very much. Bye bye.